All right, welcome back to the Digital Healthcare Podcast. We've got an interesting set of guests. We have George Kramb and Patrick Frank. They are the co-founders of a company called rightdevice. Thanks a lot for joining, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yep, likewise, man.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So let's kick off. Can you give a brief overview of rightdevice and what the product offers to those having healthcare needs?
Sure. So rightdevice, essentially it's an online platform for patient education. We have basically brought together a database surrounding about surgical implants. We kind of specialize right now in orthopedics, but our goal is to allow patients to become more aware about the options they have when they come into an operating room. And then in addition to that, we're really focused on outcomes-based results. So both statistical and subjective from the patient perspective.
Okay, so let's go into that. Let's assume and hope that most of our listeners haven't had surgery. So maybe it'd be a good place to start. You figure out you need a surgery. How does that process go down?
Sure. So I guess the best way for us to do it is the current situation. So as of right now, when somebody needs some sort of operation, generally they're going to go to see their doctor. Maybe it's a traumatic injury, so they're going to the ED. They will get diagnosed with some sort of problem or some sort of issue, and moving on from there, they'll go see a specialist concerning that issue. So we specialize right now in orthopedics, mainly total joint reconstruction. That's not necessarily a traumatic, although it can be. It's more of a degenerative disease where somebody has arthritis and it's a prolonged type of issue. And they're generally going to see their doctor, in which, majority of the time they're sending them to PT beforehand. However, if it gets to a point where a patient's in so much pain, they will eventually end up leading to some sort of surgical intervention, more than likely some sort of total joint replacement. And during that process, a lot can happen. As of right now, patients are just either talking with friends and family, maybe they're turning online, going on Google search, figure out what maybe the procedure looks like. But it's mainly just focused on the surgeon and the patient interaction. Right now, what we're trying to do is basically open the door a little bit. Patients, we kind of see there's a transparency issue in healthcare, and really in the surgical realm. And we're trying to basically open that door, allow patients to become more aware that they do have an option when it comes to surgery, and basically bring up questions with their doctor that would otherwise be untalked about. And when we're talking about that, we're mainly focused on the actual implant and what's going to be inside your body for the rest of your life.
I imagine it's kind of it definitely is a stressful time when you find out you have to have a surgery. With that comes a lot of stress and anxiety, and that probably makes it just that much more difficult to make an informed and correct decision, right?
Absolutely. And I think, chiming in here is that people tend to make, incredibly fast and hasty decisions when they're stressed, right? And what we want to be able to do here is simplify very complex information that, speaking from someone who is not fully inside of the healthcare industry prior to this, is that, this information is incredibly difficult to find. It's incredibly difficult to understand. And that's almost by design. Right. So by what we're doing and taking all of this information, subjective and statistical information, putting it all in one place, allows them to easily access that. And then at the same time, hopefully lower stress without having the additional stress of having to dissect all of the verbiage and information that is there currently.
When you say it's by design, that means it's not set up for you to get a lot of differing opinions and perspectives to help you make the decision.
As the industry,
yeah, because that's difficult, because then you have to go to 10 different places and coordinate 10 different visits. Is that right?
So yeah, I mean, what Patrick was leading on to is the fact that as of right now, I mean, patients don't necessarily know that they have an option. There hasn't been this huge, source or some sort of forum to help patients understand that, hey, I'm having some sort of, like, let's say total joint reconstruction or some sort of knee replacement. And hey, let's talk about the 5, 6, 7 implants are on the market, or, which one's better than which. Let's talk to your doctor. Why do you use this implant over others? There's a transparency issue, and it's by design, meaning that, if you try to go and try to find this information, it's rather challenging. And it's kind of set up that only specific eyes are designed to see it, meaning, like, you go onto a manufacturer's website and it asks if you're a healthcare provider or professional prior to even showing you the list of products that they sell.
Tricky. That's it's kind of unfortunate. Do you find the doctors or surgeons that are associated with the surgical procedures, do they stay pretty informed on the different options for let's say a knee replacement?
I would say yes. I would say they do. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's, that's kind of every surgeon is different type of answer. And for some situations, I would say most surgeons are pretty well educated. However, the reason why doctors choose a product over another could vary pretty drastically. It could be something as, I trained on this and I've been using it for the past 20 years. Maybe they have an incredible relationship with the sales rep and they've been using that product because the sales rep and them have some sort of lasting relationship. Maybe it's a product that they find superior over others, regardless of who's selling it. Or maybe it's just convenient. It's just sitting there on the shelf, ready to go and ready when needed.
Yeah, the reason I asked that is because you think about a family physician and their purview of what the knowledge they're supposed to have is so broad and wide. I assume surgeries are probably a little bit more focused. Like, are the surgeons typically performing the same procedure, or do they handle a wide variety?
So yeah, as far as the surgeon goes, right now surgeons are wanting to specialize and become very niche in pretty much any sort of specialty you go into. So in the case of orthopedics, you have surgeons who are specialized in total joint reconstruction. They do, hips, knees, shoulders. Then you have, orthopedic surgeons who are sports medicine focused. They deal with ACL reconstruction, rotator cuff repairs. And then the list goes on and on. You can go into spine. You can go into, foot and ankle. Specialization is very common within the surgical community.
That helps. Yeah. I can't even imagine being a family physician and not knowing the 10,000 different questions I'm going to get asked every day. So how did you guys get into this? Where did this idea originate?
Yeah. So I'll kind of take this one. So my entire professional career has been actually in medical device sales. I've worked for big orthopedic companies, small distributors, startups, and it kind of dawned on me about, I'd say 3-4 years ago. And I was, the life of a sales rep is kind of unique where, you're really battling to get in front of these doctors and you're trying to convince a doctor to use your product over somebody else's. And it didn't dawn on me till this one interaction I had in the operating room where a surgeon asked for 3 different vendors. So there's 3 different reps sitting outside the OR and the patient gets wheeled into the room and the doctor looks at all 3 of us, all of us have our stuff ready to go. And he didn't point to me, he pointed to one of the other reps. He goes, "Okay, I'm using your stuff today." And I was like, wow, I can't believe he made a decision just like that. And then it got me thinking, I'm like, wouldn't the patient want to know what products are being used or want to have an opinion on what's being put in their body? And, as a rep, you kind of spend a lot of time in the car driving from account to account. And that's when it dawned on me and I immediately called up Patrick. I said, "Man, I have an idea and I want to run by you." And that's kind of where this concept of creating almost like a database or a Yelp-like site to host medical device implants and to start allowing patients to educate themselves, to write reviews about, how much they like this implant over another or how they're doing with this implant post-operatively. And it just kind of creates almost like a community in a sense where patients are now becoming more engaged and, becoming more in control of their healthcare.
You didn't draw it on the back of a napkin or anything like that, did you?
A good old classic startup story.
What's funny is no, we actually, we didn't have a napkin. We had almost like a was like a high school sized whiteboard.
Yeah.
And it was in Patrick's living room at the time. It was just literally just rested up it was propped up on the couch. And we literally drew the blueprint of what we wanted the site to look like. And, after several sessions and, several beers later, we kind of got all the different pages laid out, how we envisioned what this looking like, and kind of did, almost like a roadmap on how, a patient would operate the site.
That's great. Did you stay as energized as you throughout as you did when that first idea popped? Because I know my friends and I, we do the thing where we have this $1 million business idea, but then when it comes, the tire hits the road, it becomes a lot more difficult. I imagine that happened to you guys at some point, right?
Well, I think one thing to add in there is that we've been through so many iterations just from learning from our customers and the people, just in general, when we speak to the idea, we realize that, one, we can start off from, this initial place and this initial idea, right? Where we got really, really excited. We realize, it's going to take so many more eyeballs on it, so many other people's opinions, talking with patients, talking with our customers. And it seems as though, every single time we learn something new that we build into it. So that excitement, sure, what it is it's almost like building something, taking it down a little bit, and then building even stronger upon that, right? So it's that constant excitement of learning and adapting and always be building something new, and making sure that we're just connecting with our clientele to get to the place where we're going to ultimately be.
Did you develop it on the side for a while then, or did you both kind of go all in on the idea?
No, yeah, it was definitely something that we did on the side. And it's one of those things where we're still trying to find the correct product market fit. I mean, we've had to do several pivots where we think we're onto something, then we go and talk with customers, and we go and talk with who we thought were our customers at the time, and realize, okay, maybe this isn't the avenue we have to go down. And so we've had to take a few pivots. However, our latest pivot, I think, is something that I could tell you personally I'm most excited about. It's heavily, almost 100% patient focused, and we basically aren't involving any sort of outside institution, meaning medical device companies, payers, hospital systems. We're really becoming a for patients by patients type of corporation, which actually gets me the most excited about what we're doing.
That's great. So then, did either of you have startup experience going into this?
So not necessarily. I mean, we worked with startup companies prior. However, we never really held a true leadership role in these startup things. So this is definitely our first venture.
A lot of the background that I have, in the startup space, I've worked in mergers and acquisitions, in investment banking, basically my entire career. And though it isn't necessarily the startup space, but one thing we've seen is that, through integration of technology, and I've always worked in legacy industries. So that's law, oil and gas, real estate, and now healthcare. What we've seen is that, through the integration of technology, that, those types of companies that build out these platforms are the ones that are swallowing all of the smaller competitors. So it's almost, kind of that experience that comes in an understanding of what creates a successful startup, what creates a successful platform, and being able to identify, those different variables as to, and implementing that within our business as well.
That's great. That wasn't a loaded question to put you guys on the spot or anything. It was more just to set up the next question about what's some of the biggest learnings you've had as you've went down this journey.
I would say the biggest learning I've personally gone through is understanding that you have to be in constant communication with your customer. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many times we've said, this is it. This is how we're going to do it. This is going to work. And then you go talk with your customer. After you've spent hours of time, whether it's building new code or spending, a ton of time trying to forecast something, and you realize, this isn't even exactly what our customers want. So that's one of the things that I've, and it's kind of cliche because I know, tons of people say it, but I can't stress how important it is. because you kind of hypothesize, what your customers want. You don't realize what your customers want until you start talking with them, until you start almost shadowing them in a sense, where you're like, hey, walk me through, what happens to you preoperatively, what happened to you, from the point of you having your injury to the point of you having surgery. And you can kind of gauge and understand where they are. So you basically put yourself in their shoes, and then you can really tailor your solution to fit perfectly within what the current customer is already doing.
Sure. And I think that was George talking, right? Patrick,
correct.
Do you have any learnings? What's something else? Because I'm sure you've just been drinking from the fire hose.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think one, understanding, the time and dedication that it does take to build something like this, and that always ensuring that no matter, even if you get, you have to go back to the drawing board, that, using that fire that I was talking about earlier to build upon the next iteration, right? So I almost think it's hand in hand with it being talking with the customers, understanding what it is that we should be building. And it's almost that humbling to the sense where just like, you were saying, you and your friends get together to build this $1 million idea. We always think we have the best idea until someone else has a better one. Right. And I think that always being able to be open to those, and then, having that final say of saying, if maybe even if we combine a couple of these ideas, that's what we should be doing. So it's that time, dedication, the effort, the resources that we pull in together. And then, of course, listening to customers, and also, being ready for the unknowns, right? You don't know and what you don't know until you know it. And it's getting into each one of those hurdles and viewing it as a challenge, and just something to get over rather than a complete hard stop roadblock.
Makes sense. Did you have trouble kind of defining who your customer was? I know you mentioned payers and medical device companies. Did you circle around some of those before ultimately landing on the patient being your end user?
Oh, of course. I mean, we built this site, and our initial hypothesis is that industry, meaning like medical device companies, would want to have at least a voice in what we're doing. And we got really excited about it until we started talking with the patient aspect, and then it made complete sense to us that it just became heavily biased, and that almost anything that a medical device company was saying or advertising is not necessarily seen as kind of like a well-rounded answer. It was mainly like, hey, what are these companies trying to push? And it wasn't necessarily the most, I guess I don't want to keep using the word unbiased, but it wasn't the most unbiased avenue for us.
I think the biggest thing there is that they're wanting to entertain these conversations to affect their bottom line and not their competitors' bottom line, right? So, I think, one of the biggest learnings there is that, being able to, with the focus on the patient, we're actually servicing everyone, right? Because we have to create this win-win in an open forum, right? Not to present biased information, and that starts with the patient, right? They're the ones with the subjective information, the subjective experiences, and really, when we think about servicing the many, it comes from their voices and being in an open forum and platform for not only the patients but all device companies, rather than just focusing and pushing a single one.
That's interesting. So let me play out how this process would work. So a patient would sign up when they need a knee replacement, and then they would browse your site that would have the wide variety of offerings that are possible. And then do they work through the process of figuring out which one makes sense for them, or is it working through that with their healthcare provider or their payer insurance company?
Correct. So to kind of give you an understanding of what our operation kind of looks like. So as of right now, you would a patient would come onto our site, start educating themselves on which implants are available for their operation. And the one thing that we know and we can't remove is the surgeon. I mean, they're the one that they eventually have to do the operation. And so what our site is currently doing is basically giving patients the ability to go in and say, hey, doctor, let's start talking about which implant you use. Okay, you use this implant. Why do you use this one? You understand that the data on, implant Y is much stronger than the current implant X you're using. And it's basically just kind of bringing up a whole conversation that that doesn't get talked about as of right now. One of the our little catchphrases we say is, we're trying to remove the blue curtain from patients. If you guys don't know, when you go into an operating room for sanitation purposes, they put a blue curtain over the patient's face. And our saying is, let's remove the blue curtain. Let's basically involve the patient in this decision, because at the end of the day, I mean, this is not like buying a car. You can't go back and sell the car. This implant's in you for the rest of your life. So let's start educating yourself. Which implants are being used, what sort of data is back on these implants, and then there's also a review-based platform a review-based characteristic of our site that basically allows patients to share their experiences with these implants.
Yeah, that's the important part. 20 years later, how is it still kicking? Right?
Yeah.
If it's broken down, you're stuck with it. Yeah. So I imagine when patients come informed, it's probably pretty eye-opening for the surgeon or the healthcare provider, because they're just not used to having that type of conversation, right?
Yes and no. I mean, as you could probably imagine, we've done a tremendous amount of research on this whole, I guess it would be, direct-to-consumer advertisement. And this is, all the studies are mainly in the pharmaceutical space. As you can imagine, you just turn on the TV and you'll see a commercial for Cialis or whatever. And they wanted to gauge whether the doctors found that these, advertisements were beneficial. And over 50% of the doctors said they actually made the interaction with the patient more enjoyable, meaning that they're getting more engagement with the patient. They're having better conversations. So I don't necessarily believe that surgeons are going to be offended by a patient trying to bring up which implant they use. I think it's going to add nothing more than empowering the patient, and then basically having a conversation that, kind of puts the patient more at ease on, what the surgeon's going to be doing in the operating room.
Yeah, that actually makes perfect sense to me, because what always blows my mind when I go see the doctor is that I've had these symptoms for months and months, and then I'm supposed to compact it all down into this 4-minute conversation. And it's kind of the same thing here, where surgeries are complex. I'm sure the implants are pretty complex, and trying to pack that all into one conversation and imagine is a short period of time is probably difficult. So it's got to be super helpful for the patient to come informed and make that conversation that much easier.
I mean, the industry itself has created, the availability for a platform like this, right? To that exact point, I mean, you have 4 or 5 minutes to have a conversation about a life-changing event, right? In no world, I mean, it doesn't matter if you're buying a house, buying a car, getting a surgery, like no major purchase or no major event that happens, happens in a 4-minute period of time. And so then the patients are left to their own devices to basically say, hey, like, how am I actually going to now educate myself to actually know what I'm getting myself into? Because sure, I know and trust my doctor, but it takes a whole lot more than just the trust to be able to say, hey, I have all of the available information that I needed in that 4-minute window, right? So it essentially creates this open door for us to be able to, again, package and supply that information and experiences to these patients for them to be able to, one, relate to, feel more at ease, and then feel as though they're more prepared going into their surgery.
Yeah, I've heard similar, or I've had similar discussions on the podcast and read similar things, and it always kind of comes down to the doctor's availability and time that they have with patients. And I don't envy them their position. It's such a tough job to do, because it's healthcare, I think, is the most complex industry for multiple reasons, and to try to have those conversations quickly is just so impossible.
Yeah, no, I mean, to kind of add a little bit on that, I mean, you're spot on. I mean, everybody is pushing doctors to see more patients. The hospital systems are wanting them to have more operations. The actual clinic itself, the clinic managers are wanting to have more patients on the books. So they're forced to see more and more of these patients, which only hinders the patient, because the patient is now getting less and less time with these doctors. 100%.
Absolutely. And I'm curious if both of you do the same thing I do. If I have any sort of health symptom or health question, the first thing I do is go to Google and start there and see what comes up, which is thinking on it right now is probably a little bit dangerous because the internet's a weird place. But is that how you approach your health as well?
That's how I approach it, and statistically, that's how about 70% of Americans do. The stat is 70% of Americans go online to research their condition, and out of that 70%, 40% of it do it prior to even talking with a doctor. So, and these stats were actually taken in 2013. So, I could only imagine that those numbers are growing. And yeah, 100%. I mean, Google is such an incredible source to get rapid information. And part of our go-to-market strategy is definitely to capitalize on the SEO and to really try to become, one of the top people on the Google search when you type in any sort of surgical operation. And yeah, because it's the way people are going. It's healthcare of the 21st century.
I want to go back to a point you made a little bit ago when you said that there's lack of trust, and you said medical device companies, people kind of consider that they're pushing whatever their agenda is. I think that's a reality that almost everyone across the industry is facing, regardless of what segment you're in. And do you think that comes from the high prices associated with healthcare costs, or where do you think that stems from?
Well, I think I think medical device companies get stereotyped. Everything in medicine's costs, is very expensive. And, anybody can look at the balance sheet of let's say Johnson & Johnson or Zimmer Biomet and figure out how much money these guys are raking in at the end of the year. But I think right now we're in a very interesting time point because there is, I'm sure you guys, if you're not aware, there's this thing called the implant files that's been coming out. And basically what it's highlighting is the fact that the FDA is really lax on the whole approval system of medical devices. And that's actually taken a toll on a decent amount of patients. And so all of these reports and these stories are starting to surface, and it's actually painting medical device companies in a very bad light. And yeah, I mean, I'm kind of torn in this situation because I truly believe medical device companies have done absolutely wonderful things for healthcare as far as invention, the progression of healthcare as a whole. However, there is, I guess, medical device companies could sometimes be seen as these greedy corporations. And I don't think necessarily they have the best reputation with the patient population.
Yeah, you could fill that in with pretty much fill in the blank with whatever part of healthcare you're looking at. And it's not too far off, probably.
And one thing I want to add in there, which I think is it's only specific to the healthcare industry. We think about this industry as a whole. It's a very emotional industry, right? Like this is an incredibly emotional, decision that people have to go through. It's affecting their well-being. It's affecting the rest of their lives. And in the middle of all of that, everyone seems to forget that, every single one of these companies is running as a business. Doesn't matter if you're a doctor, doesn't matter if you're a hospital, insurance company, medical device company, they're all running as a business for profit, right? Unless, of course, you go down the nonprofit route. But at the same time, we think about that and, their best interests are in lines with their balance sheets. And the decisions that these companies make are focused on that. And I think that it's what's created the avenues for so many of these niche startups in the space to exist. They've existed because the industry itself has provided the opportunity for them to exist. And to the point that you brought up earlier is that it is by far the most complex industry in the world. It's exactly why there has not been one platform that truly takes over the entire space like we've seen in retail or ride sharing or Airbnb in the hotel space. Again, we just think about that in this industry hasn't happened yet because of the amount of, the daunting task that is to the size of the opportunity. And so it's been niche focused, as everything in this industry has been, that platforms that are patient focused have come more into the light. And they're happening more and more by the day because people are realizing that, this space, it needs it.
Yeah, that's the number one thing I've learned since I started the podcast is that the healthcare is simply a bunch of silos, and together they do great things. They help people manage diseases, improve their health in a multitude of ways. But there's definite blind spots that each company can't really navigate because it hurts their position.
Correct.
And I think that's a perfect way of articulating what you guys are doing, is filling in that one of those blind spots. And there's tons out there, and it's going to be interesting because I can't tell if how the future is going to unfold. Is it if it's a bunch of these companies kind of filling in the gaps, and that's how we get to a better place, or if it completely blows up and there's major reform. And I go back and forth, and I don't think there's a clear answer. Probably a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
So back to the right device. How did you two go about deciding to focus on surgery and implants? Because it seems like the approach you're taking could really apply to a much broader area of healthcare.
Totally. Well, to be honest, it's one of those things where we try to take advice from other startup professionals and other basically entrepreneurs, and we really want to remain hyper focused at this point. Really, almost perfect one area, so we can simply copy and paste and start, attacking other different segments of healthcare. My vision for Right Device is much bigger than just orthopedics. I'd love to go uncover all surgery, branch into, wearable devices, or branch into, something, like DME products or something like that. Because I really think that once we kind of perfect, something small, I think we're going to be able to, very rapidly multiply that once we figure out what, the secret formula is.
Makes sense. And one other question I forgot to ask about the actual product is, how much is price factored in? Do you help uncover a common price for a certain product, or is that something that's kind of outside of the scope as of now?
So pricing with medical devices is actually, it's relatively challenging. The reason why is almost every one of these medical device companies are partnered up with several GPOs. And what GPOs basically are these big purchasing organizations, and they basically act as a middleman between medical device companies and hospitals, and they negotiate for hospitals for lower pricing. So it's rather interesting. You can go to one hospital, and let's say product X is $5,000. You can literally walk across the street to hospital, B, and that same product is $7,000. So pricing is going to be a difficult thing to obtain. However, I do see down the road having some sort of ballpark estimation for these products. However, I will note that majority of these products, especially in the orthopedic space, are roughly the same price, because they all have to stay relatively competitive. Just because the hospital systems now are really trying to consolidate on vendors, and price is becoming a very big topic, especially in the surgical realm.
Yeah, it seems like there's a pretty significant shift. You mentioned the quality aspect, and now you mentioned the pricing aspect. Why has it been that implants, in particular devices, have gone kind of under the radar when compared to pharmaceutical products? Because those are always front and center when it comes to pricing.
So one of my theories on this is, when you go to the pharmacy to pick up your prescription, you as a patient can generally see how much these are costing, whether it's a copay or whatever. However, when you have some sort of surgical intervention, the pricing can just be so confusing. I mean, it can, a total knee replacement in one part of town could be $40,000. Then you drive 2 miles away, and that same sort of total joint replacement, $65,000. So it's there's a huge pricing, basically transparency issue, and it's rather difficult. And it's one of the things that patients aren't necessarily seeing it right in front of their face when they go pick up their prescription. So, but I do anticipate probably in 5-10 years that there's going to be some sort of reform to really try to lower the pricing of these surgical implants.
Here's my theory. You get a pharmaceutical product much more frequently than a knee replacement, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Hopefully, in theory.
Yes, correct.
Great. Well, I think I've covered pretty much everything I had noted down beforehand. Is there anything, I guess, that maybe we haven't hit that you want to highlight?
Yeah, one thing that I really want to share, and this is kind of like our new trajectory with Right Device, is we're really trying to go, get more statistical data involved in our venture. We understand that the subjective, meaning patients leaving reviews, is very powerful. As you can see with other platforms, reviews is almost the first thing somebody reads before they buy something. However, our newest initiative is really to almost get statistical information. And we are currently in the process of reaching out to another organization to allow us to basically start allowing patients to share information rather than something subjective, something a little bit more analytical, in a sense where it's a number rather than just saying, hey, this feels great. So our goal is to basically create this statistical significance. So when somebody reads about an implant, they're not reading just reviews; they're also reading statistical data, and not data that's being forced out by the actual medical device company itself. This is unbiased data from Right Device, and I think it's going to be incredibly powerful for patients to see this.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and something that's much needed, because it's hard to make sense. We talked earlier about how stressful and how anxious it is getting these, and even to have the qualitative stuff's great, but I imagine having the quantitative would be hugely beneficial, so you can kind of compare apples to apples, not one person said one thing, one person said another.
That's exactly right.
Totally.
Great. Well, thanks so much for coming on and sharing the perspective. I'm always so fascinated how digital health truly covers the entire purview of healthcare. There's no place left unturned. Everywhere is ripe for digital disruption. I think you highlighted one area in particular that seems like the need is there for sure. So thanks for sharing, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Patrick and I really enjoyed our time here. And yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail right on the head. I think digital healthcare is going to have a huge impact in the future of medicine in the United States and in the world. And I think Right Device is definitely going to be a big part of that. So
that's great. So if someone wanted to, or someone was going through a knee replacement, how would they go about accessing Right Device?
So yeah, our site right now is www.rightdevice.com. Feel free to also email me. My email is just george@rightdevice.com. Yeah, we have a list of implants already up on our site, and we've basically are going to be doing a little bit of a site reconstruction in the next week or so. But the site is currently live and very open for patients.
That's great. All right. Well, best of luck to both of you. I look forward to kind of monitoring how it's going, and hope a ton of success comes your way in the future.
Thank you so much, Brad.
Thanks so much.
All right. Take care.
Take care.